And according to my watch, it is exactly 2 in the afternoon on the 11th of February 2021. A very warm welcome on behalf of the European Liberal Forum to the newest edition of On the Agenda, a webinar series organized and presented to you by the European Liberal Forum, the official think tank and foundation of the ALDE party. Today we're going to talk about how the EU can fix the vaccine situation. Can the EU fix the vaccine situation at all? Before we do that, let me very quickly tell you two things about the European Liberal Forum. I already mentioned we're the political think tank and foundation of the ALDE party, the liberals in Europe, and we are the ones who try to come up with liberal solutions for Europe, not only in area of healthcare, but especially also economy, migration, climate change, sustainability. So basically everything that you can think about in European policies. The second thing is we are not doing that alone. As the name forum suggests, we also have 47 members, amongst others, the fantastic NEOS Lab in Austria, one of our fine members, especially doing fantastic work in the area of social policy. If you haven't read their publications, please do follow them, subscribe to their information. I don't have to tell you much about the situation that we're in, because we've almost been living for a full year with a pandemic. For a couple of months now, also in hard lockdown, we are desperately waiting for a solution. One of those can be a vaccine. But let's be honest, the EU is lagging just a little bit behind if we look to other countries or other states like the US, which seem to be a much higher vaccination rate, even though the previous president, Trump, was heavily shunned for it in the first place. So how do we get out of this conundrum? This is something we want to discuss with our fantastic guest today, which I would like to thank very warmly for being with us today. Our moderator, Sam Morgan, will introduce them already in a bit. But before I hand over to Sam, just quickly a reminder that we have an opinion piece on the vaccine situation on Euractiv, written by our policy and research coordinator, Antonios Nestoras. Might be that it was a bit provocative, but hey, we live in daring times, so we might also come out with daring opinions. So without any further ado, handing over to our fantastic moderator today, Sam, please, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Daniel. Yes, thank you for that warm welcome. And I'm always very in favor of provocative opinion pieces, so I'm fully with you in that one. Yes, vaccines. Can the EU fix the vaccine situation? Does it need to fix the vaccine situation? And what needs to be fixed? We're here to find out for the next hour or so. If we think about vaccines at the moment, they're probably the most sought after item in the world. Normally, that's something we would say about gold or saffron or the latest games console or something, but at the moment it's vaccines. There have been several milestones over the last few weeks or so, ranging from low rates of vaccinations in several member states. We're thinking of likes of the Netherlands and Bulgaria. The spat between the EU and AstraZeneca, of course, was high on the agenda. And then the Article 16 of the Northern Irish Protocol and Brexit. These were all things that, should we say, were probably counterproductive to what is the light at the end of the tunnel and vaccination. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get on to the panel discussion. This is being recorded and it's being shared on social media on the ELF's Facebook page, so just bear that in mind. And to all of you in there watching this panel discussion, you can ask questions as well. It's not just me that gets the honor of asking our panelists any questions today. Please use the Q&A function to do that rather than the chat, because you're more likely to get a question if that is the case. And you can also upvote and downvote the questions you think are the most pertinent, and we'll get to those eventually, I promise. But now it's time to introduce our speakers today. First up, we have Claudia Gamon, who is an MEP with the Renew Europe group. Thanks, Claudia, for joining us. Plenary week, we know it's busy. And then we have Sibilia Quilisi, who is from Vaccines Europe. Thank you, Sibilia, for being here as well. And then we have J. Scott Marcus from Bruegel, a senior fellow at that think tank. Thank you all for being here. Three very different speakers, I think, who will give three very different viewpoints and expert opinion on what is, let's face it, an extremely complex and interesting issue. today. So without further ado, the name of this webinar is How Can the EU Fix the Vaccine Situation? Over to you first, Claudia, for your first opening statement. Maybe you can tell us whether the EU can fix the vaccine situation and what needs to be fixed. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation and the chance to speak here on this super fascinating panel also with such distinguished guests. The timing couldn't be better, I guess, with Ursula von der Leyen speaking this week in the plenary of the Parliament to also debate this here now. And I will try to keep this rather short because I think it will be more interesting to debate amongst us. First of all, I think it's important to underline that it's agreed upon and also agreed upon in the public debate that it was a good idea to have a common procurement for the vaccines. It's just even hard to imagine the chaos that we would be in right now if it had happened any other way, and all the European member states would have had to organize the vaccines for themselves. I'm just thinking out loud, with the situation we would be in right now, would be some countries getting vaccines, others hadn't. There would be different vaccines on the market in Europe. It would be total chaos. And everybody would rightfully be asking, where is Europe in all of this? Where is the EU? So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that this is very much a good idea. But a good idea alone does not make for very good policy in itself. I mean, the way that it was handled, the situation that we are in right now has shown us many parts of how the Commission works, especially in accordance with the member states, that always hasn't worked so well in the past, but in the past we hadn't been under that much stress in such a delicate timeline and such hard deadlines that we have to face. So I would say that the infrastructure, the architecture of the EU as it is right now, especially in situations like this, where the Commission has to work together with 27 member states in accordance, check everything twice if it's okay to organize something for each and every one of them, the stress test has failed. That's just one thing that is clear. Something that Ursula von der Leyen has said very publicly this time is, of course, that she agrees that mistakes have been made. But I found one sentence very interesting in her statement. It was that she said, "Science has overtaken industry at groundbreaking speed." That is absolutely true. But what is more important for the EU is that science has overtaken bureaucracy at a groundbreaking speed. Our bureaucratic model is just not able to keep up with that. And I think citizens have the right to expect more. They have, I'm not trying to be very populist on the bureaucratic nature of some EU institutions, but it's just a reality. And it's not bad in itself. It's not bad in normal times. We have such great people working in Brussels. They are impressively intelligent, have lots of experience also negotiating complex contracts. But the problem is the structure in itself. It's just not as flexible as we need it to be in times like these. And I think this is unfortunately shown at a very unfortunate timing, where we would all have needed the structures to be a lot more flexible. It's good, I think, that Thierry Breton has now gotten the job of the crisis manager, who is responsible for the, let's just say, the management part of the procurement, and so that we can really, so that DG Santé and the health commissioner can focus on the, to put it bluntly, on the science part, and that he can focus on procuring the actual and the production of the actual vaccines. I think it's good that there is now one commissioner that is solely focused on that. However, also here it's unfortunate that we're only now getting to this part of the debate. And it's fascinating because we had this debate already last year around the time where the Commission presented their vaccine strategy. I remember it very vividly, that there was of course always this question of how will we eventually get the vaccines? How will the production work? And at that time, the commissioner was pretty relaxed, saying, we're talking with everybody, and I'm sure once that there is something approved and something works, all the companies will try to work on really exploiting all the resources that they have. But I'm not sure what actually happened then, whether or not the commission was kind of surprised that the scientific development was really happening at such a fast pace, and that they would have to get going with the organization that had to happen behind the scenes. That's really unfortunate. And to make a final point also about the role that pharmaceutical companies play here. Yes, there has to be some scrutiny, but it's also important to say that pharmaceutical companies are also saving the world right now. I think this is important because vaccine development is a very pricey thing. It's also important to say how we will benefit in the future of this huge leap that the RNA vaccines have taken in the past year, what this can mean for advances in medicine in the next years. It's something that maybe many people suffering from other diseases will profit from in the next years. That is something that is super positive. And I think it's important to not try and find an easy person or institution to blame here. Things have happened on all sides. What I think is mostly to blame is European bureaucracy, even though everybody is doing their best. The system itself and the infrastructure itself and the architecture of the European Union is not doing its best. And this is why this should be a huge cry for reform after we're done with all of this. Thanks.
Thanks, Claudia. Some great points there that we'll get back to on the Q&A. Turning to you now, Sibylla, from an industry point of view, I mean, several of the pharmaceutical companies who, like Claudia said, are saving the world right now, quite literally. They're household names, you'd say. I mean, I don't think anyone had maybe heard of AstraZeneca or Sanofi or J&J a few months ago, but now everyone knows what it is. Give us some insight into how, you know, pharmaceutical firms and everyone are sort of actually approaching this, because more often than not, we get sort of a second-hand viewpoint of what's going on from whether it's politicians or, well, mostly politicians, let's face it. So yeah, over to you for a few minutes to tell us how can we fix this?
Sure. So thank you, Sam, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss today. We are 12 months into the global pandemic, and today in Europe we have already 3 approved vaccines and 2 more currently enrolling review. Since December 2020, and as mentioned yesterday, actually by Stella Kyriakides at the European Parliament, 26 million doses have been delivered across Europe, and more than 70 million people have been vaccinated at least with 1 dose. As an industry, I think we can applaud the European approach taken by the Commission and the Member States with the European vaccine strategy, because it provided the regulatory flexibility to speed the clinical review process of the vaccines while not compromising on their safety and efficacy, and in line with our united commitment as vaccines manufacturers. And also, marshalling the 27 member states cannot always be an easy task. The common EU approach aims to ensure equity in access to vaccines across Europe. And I think we have to face it. This equity in access is also something that we need to assure globally, because ultimately we have no solutions to this pandemic unless we have a global solution. So when we look back and witnessing the millions of Europeans getting their vaccines today, just 12 months since the beginning of the issue with regards to the pandemics, I think it's an incredible collaborative scientific, manufacturing and logistical achievement involving the EU institutions, the government, the health systems, the regulators, and the research-based pharmaceutical industry. So I think this is really an amazing accomplishment, when in normal time, it would have taken between 15 to 20 years, and we achieved it in 12 months. So I think this needs to be acknowledged. All that said, that today we have safe and efficacious vaccines available. the need to produce these vaccines at a massive scale posed challenges because we could not foresee that. We are using new technological platforms as well, and the scale at which we are producing is just unprecedented. So there is a huge tension related to COVID-19 manufacturing capacity today, and we completely hear it. Manufacturing billions of doses for people across Europe and around the world is an unprecedented challenge involving multiple partners working around the clock without ever compromising the safety and the efficacy of the vaccines. And I keep on repeating it because this is really the heart of what we are doing. And the fluctuations in the supply of doses, however, and we hear it, is really frustrating, is a feature of manufacturing complex biological products and never fully predictable. So we understand the frustration caused by recent reporting on reduction of the quantities of COVID-19 vaccines being delivered to the EU, but we are working on it. And I want to stress that while we all, and in particular vaccines manufacturers, have the same objective on vaccinating as many people as quick as possible with safe and efficacy vaccines, this is really our aim. We will see that as more vaccines will be approved, the capacity and the deliveries will increase as well. But at the same time, we have to remember that manufacturing of vaccines is not an easy process at all. We are happy to see that the manufacturing complexity has also been recognized by the European policymakers, and the Commission President von der Leyen has admitted that they have underestimated the challenges of manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines at such a large scale. But what we are doing as industry to overcome these hurdles, again, the manufacturers are working continuously today to raise about this issue, and at the same time finding solutions to upscale the capacity. They continue building manufacturing capacity, and they also boost the manufacturing efficiency. And as example, I would just like to mention, for example, recently Pfizer, that has revealed that the time it takes to produce a COVID-19 vaccines batch could soon be cut from 110 days down to 60 days. So they are really working hard on this. And the pandemic has also fostered collaboration between companies. And this is happening, I mean, on a regular basis, we see new collaboration being announced. Sanofi agreed to produce more than 100 million doses of Pfizer and BioNTech vaccines to speed vaccination efforts. Soon after, we heard about Novartis offering Pfizer its manufacturing facilities in Switzerland, and more to come. So all this is going towards the right direction. But I want to ensure that we want to ensure that vaccines reach everyone. And for that, and I really would like to emphasize this, companies need to be allowed to put their full focus on scaling up manufacturing for vaccines. And with regards to the recent developments, and notably the establishment by the European Commission on the export authorization systems for member states to use regarding COVID-19 vaccines, this added another layer of complexity. This is already delaying the supply of vaccines and could further jeopardize the supply of access to EU-produced vaccines to people across Europe and around the world. So even if the export authorization are granted, and with regards to finished products today, we haven't seen issues, we had 5 days to the time frame at a time when every day counts for people living through this crisis. And this, we actually are quite stuck with regards to the EU decisions to include clinical trial samples in these authorization systems, which further complicates actually further the research and testing into vaccine efficacy. So such export controls, honestly, from the EU could spark the reduction of in global supply and lead to a similar situation as what we witnessed from the first wave of the pandemic, when EU member states imposed export bans for essential medical supply. So let's build on the lessons learned, honestly. And with regards to this last point with lessons learned, I would like to conclude my opening remarks to the fact that what we learned from this pandemic is that we need to all work together more effectively going forward, public and private. We were really heartened at the initiative of the Commission and the EMA to initiate weekly meetings with the industry representatives to solve operational issues during the first wave of the pandemic. And we are happy to continue working like this to overcome the hurdles with regards to manufacturing. And most of all, I hope this coordination and cooperation during the pandemic can lead to a better permanent dialogue between the Commission, the industry, the civil society on medium to long-term policies, and including also a comprehensive approach to a pharmaceutical industrial policy and trade strategy. I really believe that only this way we can hope to learn from the lessons learned from this pandemic, and we can forge a better future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sibylla. I think that's a good aspiration for all of us to aim for, I think, is this better cooperation. Scott, turning to you now. I think we all have a different kind of idea of what issues are most important that have gone wrong, shall we say, over the last few months or so. Is it the procurement? Is it the spat with AstraZeneca, et cetera, et cetera? Maybe you can give us some insight into, what you think are the most pressing issues that need to be resolved.
Well, in fact, it's in some ways all of the above. But certainly the spat with AstraZeneca was unnecessary. The export controls were unnecessary. Both were very counterproductive. But I think when we look at things from the perspective of today, it's important to start by remembering that some things were done very much right at the beginning of the crisis during the first wave. And here I would very much support the comments made by Ms. Gamon, which is, health is basically responsibility of the member states. We might easily have had competition among the member states. There were only limited tools available to do joint purchasing. There is a joint purchase agreement that's existed since 2013. It has been used during the current pandemic for purchasing things like masks, protective equipment, PPE. Wasn't the right mechanism for the vaccines because it doesn't prevent the member states from competing with one another. One of the things that was done profoundly correctly at the beginning was the decision to use the emergency support instrument, the ESI, as a joint funding mechanism for all of Europe. And one of the annexes to the agreement among the member states in support of that was an agreement not to go outside of that emergency support instrument for the vaccines that were thus procured. If we hadn't done that, we would have had competition among the member states, much by the way as the United States had, not for vaccines, but rather for ventilators and for PPE. Because of a lax federal response in the United States. What we might have seen in Europe was smaller or poorer member states being crowded out for vaccines by larger or richer member states. This is what the joint procurement arrangement, the ESI, avoided. So this was great, and this was really important. What didn't happen and needed to happen was a rounding of the corner. The original plan was to back research into a large number of vaccines in order to make sure that at least something comes through the process. That was fine. And in fact, it's also fine that not every vaccine comes through, although I have to say, a surprisingly large number of the vaccines are generating good results. It's amazing. In any case, the strategy was right. We could afford to place bets and lose a few. That was fine. What didn't happen was a rounding of the corner to do really large-scale purchases of those vaccines that were the first to come through the authorization process. And what we hear from all three of the authorized vaccines is that the orders were placed either late or that far less of the vaccines were ordered than could have been. So that's really the fundamental problem, and almost everything else that we're experiencing today flows from that shortcoming. We don't need to beat up the Commission. This is the first time they're doing it. They've already acknowledged responsibility. I don't think we need to say more. The focus today should be what can we do to fix things? And we need to get this moving faster. If we look at the number of people being vaccinated today as a fraction of national population, we see that it is stabilized at levels that are almost identical in the major European countries, in Spain, France, Germany, and Italy. Given that the vaccines are ordered and then distributed on a population basis, I think what this is telling us is that the differences due to differences in the national programs are negligible. It's all about supply. So we've got to get the supply fixed. And it's urgent that we do that. A good back of the envelope kind of academic study done in the United States estimated the cost of the pandemic at $20,000 per person per year. The most expensive vaccine costs 28 euro. I mean, there's just no comparison. So we have to be willing to make investments and in some cases make bets to get this going better than it's currently going. The US is currently vaccinating at about 4 times the rate of those European countries. I'm sorry, other way around. US is 5 times actually the rate of the European countries. UK is about 4 times the rate of the European countries on a per day basis as a fraction of population. So we need to get moving. And what do we need to actually do to get moving? Well, as a first point, the Commission did announce on January 8th that they were getting another 300 million doses of the BioNTech-Pfizer vaccine. Assuming that the order is actually placed and that the deliveries are reasonable, that would actually go a long way towards dealing with the shortfalls. And by the way, the shortfalls are a relatively near-term problem. By the end of the year, we probably have a glut of vaccine. The problem is we want to get vaccine into people's arms over the next 3 to 6 months. Especially, we need to get it into the arms of high-risk populations, the elderly, those with comorbidities, other conditions. And we need to do that as much as possible before the more dangerous, more contagious variants get seriously going on the European continent. I've looked at the data. People talk about a 40% increase in contagiousness, but that's the exponent in an exponential growth curve. You talk about that for a few weeks, you're talking about a huge difference in the number of people infected. We need to get out in front of that with the vaccination program. That's why running late is potentially seriously bad news. So the order for the additional doses was good, and this is of the vaccine that's highly efficacious, 95%, and very safe. So that was the right thing. The other kind of things that need to happen, I think, are promoting the kind of cooperation, exactly what Sibylla was saying, that the European institutions need to be working with the firms, helping them to sort out problems, helping them to sort out any challenges in supply or production chains. You know, there are probably areas where European institutions can support the companies. This is a good thing. The companies themselves have a tall order in sorting out the various production challenges. Remember, these are new vaccines. The 2 leading vaccines use an mRNA technique that's never been manufactured at scale. It's absolutely remarkable what's going on. And in some cases, I think also what the European institutions need to do is to not needlessly distract attention from what the companies need to do. This is something that's easily missed. Some of the discussion now is should the companies be forced to cross-license technology? Well, I've never worked in the pharma industry, but I've worked in technology industry in the United States. Technology transfer is not trivial. It takes management attention. It takes time from skilled professionals. And you have to have the right infrastructure in the first place, which not every pharma company has. So again, I think, rather than creating needless contract disputes, as the Commission has done with AstraZeneca, or needless export controls that damage our position in the world and risk retaliation on supply chains that we depend on. Rather than that, the European institutions should be trying to work with the industry and help them and not get in the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And to everyone watching, a reminder to get your Q&A questions in. We have some flowing in already. If I could just turn to you, first of all, Claudia, to sort of get your viewpoint as a member of the European Parliament. The European Commission has been criticized quite a lot for the lack of transparency about how these talks with pharmaceutical companies have gone on. Are you concerned about that moving forward, or is this something that is already, it's in the past now? I mean, as Scott said, this is something that's already happened. Let's look to the future. Or do you think that serious work needs to be done as we move forward? Because I think we can all safely say that this isn't going to be a one-time vaccination thing, right? This is something that we're going to probably have to have as part of our daily lives going on for X number of months, years, whatever. So what do you think needs to change? You know, less redaction, less reading rooms, and more involvement of MEPs in the negotiation process, or what? What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is one of the very complicated aspects of this. I personally really believe that everybody in this situation would benefit from more transparency. I think it's also in the interest of the pharmaceutical companies because they are also under much scrutiny. But I also understand that things like these in general should be agreed upon before. So it's also pretty unfair to say we need transparency, even if it's something that for the other contract party is that if that's news to them, that wouldn't really be fair. So what would be interesting to see, I mean, obviously the prices are interested in what has actually been negotiated to what should be delivered in which quarter. Yes, that's all also interesting. But something that you were just referring to, I think will be more interesting, namely, how flexible will we be in the coming months if some of the vaccines will be changed slightly in order to accommodate changes in the virus, the new variants of the virus. I mean, and that is also interesting for the perspective of the European Medicines Agency, because it's an advantage that we have with the mRNA vaccines that they can be tweaked slightly in order to be more to have a higher efficiency to target certain variants. But it would be strange, if not completely crazy, if they would have to go through the entire process at the EMA that the first vaccine had to go through, because it's basically, as far as I understand it, more or less the same vaccine, and it will be just as safe as the one before. It will just target the information that is changed in the design of the vaccine is minimal. So I think it would be a good sign also from the Commission and from the EMA to find a new process that can accommodate these vaccines. And that is also something that is in respect to the advances in science and in medicine, because it's also something where we have to accommodate the huge leap that has been taken last year by the scientific community in developing these vaccines. We wouldn't have had the same success in vaccine development 5 years ago. The technology wasn't definitely at that point in time was not at where it is now. So it's sort of, that is also something where we can say that we've had a lucky situation in a very, very unlucky situation. Thank you, science. That is also something that should always be underlined. But then science has done its part. Now we have to do our part in the administration, in the bureaucracy behind the scenes, so that people can get a safe vaccine very quickly. And that is the kind of information that I would be very interested in right now. How flexible are we in these contracts that we can say we might not be needing 400 million doses of that very particular vaccine, but we might be needing 200 million doses of a slightly different vaccine that has more efficacy with different variants of the virus. And I do hope that this is something that the Commission is working on. Actually, President von der Leyen mentioned this a couple of times in her speech in Parliament yesterday, that they would want to focus on how to deal with the variants, not just from the vaccine side, but also from the public health measure mitigation side. So that is something that makes me very hopeful that they really have their mind set on the right things now.
I mean, and turning to you, Sibylle, on the variants, because I think especially, I mean, I'm British, so I think I'm slightly as worried about this as well, about how these variants are going to affect the vaccination rollout and infection rates. What is your relationship then with the European Medicines Agency, for example, when it comes to these variants? Does it slow down the vaccination manufacturing process more? does it create more complexities in terms of, you want to produce more vaccine where it's needed? Or is it just another, it's just another thing that you need to take into consideration when you are producing these vaccines, for example?
I think maybe the first step is with regards to whether the current vaccines protect against those new variants or not. And this is what is currently being assessed. And we can see that already the vaccines that we have today, the mRNA vaccine, seems to show pretty good efficacy against the UK and the South African variants. So this is already the one step, rather than reinventing the wheel. Maybe whether what we have already is good. So that's one step. The other step is that companies are already working in the development of vaccines dedicated to the coverage of the variants. So we don't wait to the end. The industry is already working on this. And how the EMA is actually tackling that, for the moment, I don't know. I think the first step is really about, based on the current vaccines, what works and what doesn't work. And this is going to impact, obviously, the rollout of the vaccination program, because once we know exactly on which variants, which vaccines works, and which variants is more predominant in one country compared to another one, this is where potentially there is an opportunity as well to optimize the use of those vaccines in the vaccination program.
I mean, and Scott, you called the export transport mechanism and the Commission spat with AstraZeneca, my apologies, counterproductive. I think that's a really accurate way of putting it. I think a lot of people would agree with that. And Sibylia, you said earlier how this was more of a distraction and a layer of complexity in addition to that. As we do look to the future, because I think that's important as we talk about these issues, we think about things like raw material imports for vaccines, COVAX, for example, getting vaccines to other countries. How damaging, Scott, would you say the Commission's, dalliances with this export control issue have been? Is it sort of an irreparable kind of damage, or is it something that can we have some sort of reset in terms of how the EU approaches this issue?
It's a little hard to know how damaging it'll be. The international responses are not all in yet. I think it's quite damaging at many different levels. Certainly, it invites retaliation from other countries. Many countries are actually dependent on the EU for raw materials that they use in producing vaccines. So it's a real anxiety-producing move, aside from the delays that Sibylia already talked about. But also it's really damaging in terms of our own security. At the same time that we're trying to support developing countries with vaccines through the COVAX program, we're talking about export controls that actually have nothing to do with our problem. Our problem isn't with too much going out of Europe. If anything, the worry the Commission was, I believe, overreacting to was about too little coming in, not about too much going out. So I see it as highly counterproductive. Again, the retaliation is actually the single thing that I worry most about. But if we don't get this solved in the rest of the world, we're going to keep re-importing cases. It also means that we're creating a breeding ground for new variants. So for many different reasons, we're not in good shape until everybody's in good shape. The export control is highly counterproductive in that sense. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm doing, as it happens, coming back to your earlier question, what do we do for future crises? I happen to be project manager for a study for the IMCO committee of the Parliament. There'll be a public presentation on it on the 22nd of February at the IMCO meeting. And there, one of the key questions is, first, how has the European internal market been impacted by the pandemic? But then secondly, what should be done to better protect ourselves against future pandemics? And there, I think there are a couple of quite obvious recommendations. The first is that just the level of funding for the emergency support instrument wasn't at the right level. 2.7 billion, of which not all of that was for vaccines. Compare this to 18 million US dollar for Operation Warp Speed, and you see what was provided for the program was enough to do some research, not enough to do the bulk purchases of the vaccines. Coupled with that, the people running the program should have had enough flexibility to make the pivot that I talked about. They should have had enough flexibility to actually make purchases once it became clear, placing some reasoned bets, a few of which they might lose, but to actually make the necessary purchases at the point when we knew which ones were going to be the most successful out of those that were being researched. And that also clearly failed. So these are some fairly obvious things that need to be done going forward. What should not be done going forward, I would strongly argue, is to try to have more rigidity in the delivery schedule in the contracts. We've had a lot of discussion about this. I think it's a very counterproductive discussion. If you look at the AstraZeneca contract, it talks about best reasonable efforts. Contrary to what the Commission says, it talks about them not just for the research, but also for the delivery. That's right. If we hadn't had provisions like that, we wouldn't have any contracts at all, because there were too many risks in the development of these new vaccines. Nobody would have accepted a contract with rigid delivery dates and penalties for a totally unknown technology. So the contracts were right. What needs to be done is a better job of managing the relationships and a better job of placing the orders when they need to be placed.
I could just turn to the Q&A session at the moment, because we've had a few good ones come in. This one's from Enrico Iacovizzi. Thank you, Enrico. While securing production and distribution of vaccines is a priority, shouldn't the EU also look at supplementary treatments to prevent and treat COVID? And then he goes on to mention the fact that Italy, Germany, Czech Republic are already looking into these treatments, and that the Commission itself procured COVID treatments from Gilead in 2020. Why aren't we investing in this more? I mean, maybe this is a question for you, Scott, for you, Claudia, as well. Should we not be putting all of our eggs in the vaccine basket? You know, is there more sort of aspects to this in terms of healthcare?
Well, I think the simplest answer is the progress on vaccines has been much more convincing and much faster than on medications. There's hardly any medications that are actually approved for use. Even with remdesivir, the WHO ran a separate study, said we don't actually see any benefits and recommended against use. So I would say at the moment, you know, it's not that one would say philosophically one is better than the other, but just the progress has been vastly better on the vaccines.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just turning to you, Sibylia, about just how the vaccine industry works in a way. The COVID vaccine is not going to be the only vaccine that people will need in the coming months and years. Is it a case that pharma companies are shifting capacity away from other vaccines, that, you know, the ones that we take on a regular basis, the normal flu vaccine for elderly people, for priority groups? If we don't plan this correctly, is there a way that this will suffer in the coming months, or is this not one or the other? Both can be manufactured.
It's not one or the other. You don't shift. You simply cannot do that like this, and you just can't do it. And I think it's important. So in terms of the food per se, we need to plan for the next pandemic, for the next season already. Yeah? We are ending one season, and we need to prepare for the next one. So there is no interest, but it would be from a public health standpoint. It won't just work to switch the current production capacity dedicated to food to COVID-19. So no, this is not a possibility.
And if we just go for a moment to the European Medicines Agency again, which I need to apologize to personally for hounding them so much about the Sputnik 5 vaccine. It's Josip Borrell's fault for mentioning it. And it's a question actually from Adam Bartha, and it's to Claudia. You mentioned the need to reform EU bureaucracy to speed up processes in the future. What do you think about mutual recognition of vaccine approval between developed economies? Hungary automatically approves all vaccines for domestic emergency use that were already approved in EEA member countries or candidate countries. Should this approach be adopted more widely across the EU?
I'm not really sure if I'm the right person to ask this. I mean, obviously I have political opinions on where I think the problems lie, but I mean, there are people that are experts in this field that know what kind of information do we really need in order to approve a vaccine, and I think those should be the ones that decide how the hierarchy of taking these decisions looks like. But the problem, I think it can be solved at the EMA, and they can do it with their own procedures, but I believe that within their own procedures, as far as I understand it, from what I've read and from what I've heard, there is still room for improvement and to speed up the process. And we all know that it's not only the approval of the vaccines, but also what has happened before, what support did the companies get in order to really ramp up their production, and what do they get afterwards. It's not only whether or not a vaccine has been approved 2 weeks earlier or 2 weeks later. It's an entire pool of different problems that we are talking about right now. So I would be very skeptical with that approach. I think it's good and I also understand let me get to another train of thought. Half a year ago, or maybe 3/4 of a year ago, the debate was so different. We had hearings in the European Parliament with the health commissioner, where let's maybe say half of the questions were really directed in how can these vaccines be safe if you have a different procedure now with the rolling approval. And Stella Kyriakides was only focused on saying we are not cutting corners, because the main fear of people at that point in time was safety. And this has changed very much the public perception of this process and the prioritization of the public of what they expect from the Medicines Agency and the European institutions. They want to get a safe vaccine, but also fast. And they have a lot more trust, I think, in the process now, because when other developed nations approve vaccines, obviously the debate changes as well. So I think we definitely, my personal opinion, definitely not an expert opinion, but let's say call it an informed opinion, would be to leave it at the EMA, but really get them to review their process, really cut bureaucracy and not scientific scrutiny. That is what is needed, I think.
Turning to you. Oh, yes, Scott.
I was going to say, if I may, no, I very much support that. When we talk about the time for approvals, I actually think it's putting the focus in the wrong place. The difference in timing between the UK approval for the Pfizer vaccine, if I'm not mistaken, in the EMA was 10 days. I'm honestly not very worried about a 10-day delay. I'm worried about delays of months, not of weeks, or not of days. So I think this is really kind of a false dispute. But when we talk about the delays and the challenges in the vaccine program, we've talked about 2 of the 3 big ones. We've talked about getting the vaccines and getting them procured. The second is getting them into people's arms. But the third is ensuring that people are willing to be vaccinated. And that potentially represents a huge challenge. What we know is that we need a substantial fraction vaccinated just to get this herd immunity, if we can reach it. Some of the papers suggest 50 to 70%, but that was before the variants appeared. It's probably higher in light of the variants now. And what we also know from for example, polling work that was done by Ipsos for the Worldwide Economic Forum, the WEF, is that in France, something like 54% of the population was willing to be vaccinated as of September. In Germany, it's about 67%. That probably doesn't get us to the necessary threshold. So ensuring that we maintain public confidence in the vaccines is crucial. And for that reason, I think we want to be really reluctant to lower the level of scrutiny applied to vaccine approval. I think that having the EMA do it where it gets looked at by all of the member states, where there's a proper process, I think that has real value.
I mean, when the EMA approved the AstraZeneca vaccine, they said it was fit for everyone over 18. They acknowledged the fact that for the over 65 group, there was not much data, but they also qualified that and said, we don't see any reason why it will not provide significant protection. But then you have a group of member states who all say, we're not going to be giving this vaccine to these age groups. Is that something that erodes confidence among normal people in vaccination, where you have what is ostensibly the scientific body of the EU for medicine saying one thing, and then national governments deciding a slightly nuanced different thing? Is that something that really erodes, like you say, confidence?
I think it's a hard thing to explain to the public. And I also think that some of the discussion hasn't really, hasn't given the real reasons for the decisions that have been taken. I've read the studies for the AstraZeneca, and partly they bollocksed up their testing a bit. The first sample that was done with a wrong initial dose. And oddly enough, they got 90% efficacy, whereas the people who got the correct dose had 62%. The study quoted a 70% average, but that's kind of rubbish because nobody gets both the wrong and the right dosage. They get one or the other. When the EMA said 60%, I think that that's in line with the 62 quoted in the study and is right. It's also true, however, that there were very few people over 55 who were in that study, not 65, but 55. So it really begs the question. The statistics are just as weak for those in the 55 to 64 age group as for those over 65. If that were the real reason why Germany isn't vaccinating people, presumably they would have also declined to vaccinate those in the 55 to 64 group. I think the real reason is quite a different one, which is you have 2 vaccines currently authorized that have 95% efficacy. Why should they be vaccinating high-risk individuals with an only 60% efficacious vaccine when they have the option to use a really effective one? That, I believe, is the real reason. I think I would have been happier if people were saying that in so many words. But I think it's a good decision, just not for the reasons that they're claiming.
Mm-hmm. Claudia.
If I could, just a quick, I wrote down that you said before that you think that the differences in the national programs are negligible because the question is actually really supply. I'm not really sure. I think that is true, unfortunately, because first of all, there are 2 aspects to this, and one relates to what you just said, meaning the trust in the vaccines or vaccine hesitancy, because that is also very much a part of a national vaccination program to really instill trust in what the vaccine can do. And the logistics in national programs, I believe, will show the huge differences in member states' health systems, how digitized they are, how whether or not they're planning to do it more centrally or decentralized. For example, in Austria, we have a decentralized approach, which I personally think will not end up being a good idea in the short term and in the long term. We have our health system is not digitized at all. All the small regions are doing their own thing and bringing the vaccines to the people. I don't think it will work at all. And I think speed, after all, is a matter of life and death in this situation. If you're bringing the vaccine to people over 80, and the longer it takes here, because logistically we can't get it done, that is a huge problem. And I agree with you that hesitancy, vaccination hesitancy will be an issue. And we're jumping to, in the public debate, we're jumping from one point to the other. And that's, but I think that vaccine hesitancy should be something that we should be focused on constantly, because it's not over. We talked a lot about it in the fall because of the studies that were out, but we should be talking about it constantly. And there should be every community, every regional administration should be engaged in this, engaging community leaders, like the leader of the local marching bands, the local preacher. Everybody should be talking about how important it is to get vaccinated. And people where, I'm saying this very bluntly, normal people don't trust their local preacher and their local marching band leader a lot more than they trust their national politicians. So if they are saying that the vaccine is safe, it's probably a lot better than if many celebrities and politicians are telling them that it's safe to do so.
I mean, I saw that the National Health Service in the UK have enlisted Elton John and Michael Caine to advertise vaccines to them, which I thought was quite good. But like you say, there needs to be a community approach to this, right? I mean, just turning back to the Q&A, because I think we have a slightly interesting one again. From Boris, thank you, Boris. Beyond the crisis phase of the pandemic, we should assume that COVID will be with us for years. I think that's unfortunately may be true. If this is the case, do you think the Commission will continue to be the joint purchaser for vaccines for all member states, or will we go back to national procedures? And then Boris says how Germany is reportedly increasing their budget for vaccine procurement. And I guess we can also point to the fact that Hungary has gone it alone with the Sputnik 5 vaccine, and the Czech Republic is also thinking about doing the same. Maybe a question for anyone who wants to answer it. Is there a danger that these issues that we have been discussing, that national governments will basically say, well, I'm sorry, the European Commission, this wasn't good enough, we'll do it by ourselves?
If I could, I think that the fact that we've had a somewhat flawed execution of the program at European level encourages the member states to go their own way. I think that's unfortunate. The German case, at least what's appeared in the press, it's a little hard to judge what's happened. If indeed there are 30 million doses purchased outside of the framework, that appears to me to actually be a violation of the agreement that was signed with the member states. It doesn't seem, living in Germany at one level, I suppose I could be happy, but it doesn't seem to me to be a good thing for European policy or for any other policy within the European Union. As you say, there is a commitment on an announcement, at least from the Hungarian government, to purchase 2 million doses of the Sputnik vaccine. The Sputnik vaccine, based on the published on the reports I've seen, reliable reports, seems to be a good vaccine. So it's not the vaccine that's the problem. It's that they shouldn't be buying things until it goes through the EMA.
And Claudia, do you think that these issues will prove to be too much for national governments, or the EU can do a little bit of maybe reforming and getting rid of the bureaucracy that you mentioned before we get to that point?
Well, I hope so, because giving up now would be the worst thing that could happen to the European Union. I think if they were to say, well, let's just scrap this, everybody does their own thing, that would be the absolute worst outcome of anything that could happen right now. So it's very important that they get their act together and that it goes smoothly from now on. I think that's very important for the entire future of the European Union, especially looking at the fact that we will be having a public debate about institutional reform in the coming years.
Strongly support that.
And unfortunately,
Sam, it is worth noting that as to part of the routine immunization programs, it is really dealt in terms of procurement mechanism. It is really dealt at national level. And as industry, because joint procurement has or driven essentially by price, it has to be said. And it is valuable indeed in terms of pandemic crises such as we are in today, on a more routine basis, unless the mechanism is more value-based driven than price-driven. It will be actually complex to keep this for a sustainable vaccine ecosystem over time. So this is something to be thought through. Is what is our aim with regards to the sustainability of the innovation with regards to our vaccines over the long term, and what type of mechanism in terms of procurement mechanism should be put in place to ensure this sustainability, whether it is joint procurement or something else, but should it be value-based procurement to ensure the sustainability.
Thank you, Sibylla. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. This issue, I think we could have a discussion on this for ages. I'd actually like to pick up on a point you said earlier, Sibylla, about, I think it's important for us to remember the medical marvel that has happened over the last 12 months or so, where it is so easy to be defeatist and pessimistic about the current situation the world is currently in. As soon as you start to think about the advancements we've made in dealing with this issue, there's a lot to be optimistic and positive about. Thank you to all three of you for being here for this panel. I think we've talked about some really important and interesting things. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. I think that, hopefully you've taken something from this. I'm now going to pass the floor over to Andre Constantin from ELF, who is going to round off the discussion for us. And I guess I'll see you next time at another event sometime, and be sure to tune in again to the On the Agenda series for more of this kind of content. Andre.
Sam, thank you very, very much for that. I just wanted to start by congratulating all our wonderful speakers and thanking them once again for taking the time to be with us on this afternoon and to talk about this very, very important topic that is on the agenda of the European leaders as we speak here today. It is true that the whole process could have been a bit more transparent, and let's hope that everybody can learn something and move forward with more knowledge. We hope that all of these little setbacks and little hiccups can actually improve the communication process and the whole procurement process at the EU level, as it was very clearly mentioned, and I completely agree with that. It's better to stick together and to try to fight this disease together than actually break up and try to fight it in our own, well, not try to fight it alone. We will succeed together, and I think everybody, be it from the highest levels of the European Commission to the national governments, national parliaments, to the local authorities, to the GP that you have in your local area. I think that we all have to contribute to slowly building and consolidating this new reality that we live in order to not get back to where we were back in 2019. I don't think anybody's expecting really that, but in order to build a more secure future for us and for our children, in order to ensure that we have this future in front of us. Vaccines is one way to do it, but until you get the chance to get vaccinated, please don't forget to respect all the social distancing rules that are in place in your country or where you live, either in your block of flats or city or town. It doesn't really matter. Wash your hands, wear a mask, keep social distancing, and soon we will be able to actually meet physically for these things and not just have an endless series of webinars. Talking about webinars, in 2 weeks' time, we'll have a new one on the agenda series. Yes, it will still be a webinar in 2 weeks on a Thursday. We're welcoming you for that already. Please check the ELF website for more information about this upcoming webinar and about our upcoming events, all our member organizations, events, and publications. We have some very, very good ones that have just come off the press, let's say digital press. So please check that out. Stay safe. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody who participated, who asked questions. And thank you again to Sibylla, Scott, Claudia, and Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Keep safe.